super short video on containers of objects. What's a container? We know what these are. We've seen arrays and vectors quite frequently in our coding experiences up to this point. So we will be using an array or a vector. For this lab, though, however, coming up, we'll use the array class, not the native C-style arrays. But these data structures could really be any data structure. Matter of fact, starting next week, we'll look at linked lists, and we can easily pop in objects into linked lists, and we will next week, plus many other types of data structures that we're going to go over this semester. So a container of objects is a very straightforward implementation and an extension of what we've already known. We've known a vector of integers or an array of names, and this is no different. Let's just say this is an array. This will be an array of objects. So if this is our array, just any particular element, rather than holding a single individual native variable like an integer, it's just going to instead hold a single object, a single programmer-defined data type, a single abstract data type object. All of these are correct terms. And that object then that's stored in there will in and of itself have all of the private member variables available, plus all of the public member methods available, all within that object. And that's just one element in our container. Now, we have to reference these elements quite carefully. Let's take a look at that. Here's an array of student objects, kind of going on the same theme that we've been looking at. If we want to reference any particular object, that's just using array or vector nomenclature like we have been. Array sub I, vector sub I. You can use any of the vector iterators as well. However, to access the object's public member functions, we've got to use the dot operator. Now, keep in mind that since we're coding this stuff in main here, we are not going to be able to say something like this, array sub I dot name, because that is directly accessing or directly referencing a private member variable, and we can't. Instead, we've got to go through the authorized interface. This would be the get name function. So we've got to remember that behavior and make sure that we just keep that clear in our minds, that we can't access it directly, but we've got to use the setter or getter. And this really is the gist of it. To go through and traverse an array of objects, we just traverse it like we always have been. And simple code for that is just going to look like this. We're just going to traverse this array each time going through this loop. We're going to call the get name and get ID public member methods for this class. And we're using the range-based for loop here rather than a for loop that's got an index in it. So we can just use the auto keyword, and every time through, val is going to represent an object, and we can then use val.getName, val.getID, val.whatever public member methods are available to that object. And this just steps through it, and we get the output each time. Let's take a look at some code. Here's some code in demo 2 that has been modified to show that it is using a vector and an array. First, we're going to include those libraries here. Going down, we see our class definition is exactly the same. To simplify our code, we just have the print method as a class method and not as a main function method. Here, I'm going to create both a vector and an array and just show how these are similar. Then inside our loops here, first I've got an outer guard just to make sure that the input file is good. You'll note here that we've got an input.txt with 4 records in it. Each record is 3 attributes, the GPA, the name, and the course load in credits. And you can see that there's 5 records here, not 4. So here in our code, this block here just tests and ensures that the file is there and in good working order. Here we are just going to process the file in this while loop. So what this is going to do is go through as long as there is data to be read, then it will keep going through this loop. And how do we do that? Well, first we're going to read the GPA, then read the name, then read over here the load. Here in line 49, we create a temporary student object, and then we're just going to populate that object with the name, GPA, and course load there. And then all we do is push that object into our vector. And just for comparison, then we can also add that to our array object. Then since our array object needs an index, I'm going to go ahead and increment that index. Otherwise, we're using pushback for the vector, and that doesn't need an index at all. And then to output, I've got two code blocks. One is going to output the vector. The other is going to output the array. And this uses the same auto keyword and a range-based loop just to step through both of those containers and using the getters in order to retrieve that object data.